Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike, and I'm the host here of the Leadership Toolkit. As he mentioned, we're here to help grow yourself, grow your team, grow all of the people around you through having collaborative conversations with lots of other awesome people from various verticals of business. So I have an absolutely phenomenal guest with me today. I'm going to introduce her right away. Miss Tammy Delaney-Plugowsky is
Hi,
here with me today. How are you today, Tammy?
doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know that our audience is going to be really excited because we're going to get into it and we're going to have some conversations. But first, before we do that, if you would do me a favor, and if somebody is living under a rock and they don't know who you are or what you do, could you just share with the audience who is Tammy? What do you do? Where are you at in your leadership journey? Just a little bit.
Right. So I'll try to keep it short because it's a long story. My name's Tammy. I'm from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, born and raised, lived in South Florida for a couple of years. So had the American experience while down there. I started my first career as a nurse and a team leader in an emergency room. That's where my leadership skills really started to take off. And then from there, I entered the federal civil service, the federal government in Canada in 2003 during, I'm going to call it COVID OG or SARS 1.0. And
COVID OG. Okay.
yeah, COVID OG, and reestablished the quarantine services in both Montreal and Ottawa airport services at that time. Grew my career there into managerial and senior management positions. I managed the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile for the country for a number of couple of years, managed a multi-million-dollar budget, had dozens of staff, blue-collar types responding to me. And then from there, went into the executive world where I oversaw and led a lot of the border measures during COVID, got burnt out, decided I wanted to be a coach and took some training. And now I am an executive coach and I train others on how to be great leaders, do leadership assessments, and really help to coach people to grow their careers through the growth of their leadership skills. So that's like in a very big nutshell, kind of what I've done in my life. So
No,
far.
that's phenomenal. And I think, well, here's what I think is really cool. Like moving from healthcare into that coaching and leadership
Yeah.
role, like it's about people, right?
Yeah.
You're connecting with people and you're connecting with people obviously differently now
Yeah.
than what you were. And we were talking a little bit prior to just very briefly prior that you have a YouTube channel, right? That's
Yep.
kind of your calling card. Also, I'll hit this early so I don't forget because I tend to. A couple of things. One, if anyone wants to connect with Tammy, she's at her link tree right there at On the Level Leadership. It's an early Plugowsky for you.
I like what you did there.
Oh,
Nice.
last
Gonna
week
have
I
to
had my
remove
buddy
that.
Matt on the show. Matt is known for dad jokes, so I got to get in there.
No, that's good.
So if anyone wants to connect with you, but I've watched and like I was saying, we get in and we have you're in sort of let's call it a mastermind group
Yeah.
that I'm in as well, and we've got probably 8 people in there, and I always like your perspective because you're very direct.
Yeah.
You just the way that you present things, there's not a whole lot of fluff. You're like, well, why don't you just do this? And I think there's a lot of value in that. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to talk some more here on the show.
And just a quick note on that.
Yeah.
That's a growth area that I had to learn to go from aggression to assertive opinions. And it's called executive presence. So when you grow your executive presence, there's no time for fluff. There's no time for BS. It's just get to the point. A previous VP that I used to report to used to say, "What's the problem? Why do I care? And how much is this going to cost me?" I thought right there was like in a nutshell explained exactly how to present and to brief up. Anyway.
No, I think that's really good. So I'm going to repeat it. Just what's the problem? Why do I care? What's it going to cost me? So you can be direct and still caring, because that's one thing that I also think you do a good job of is the fact that you do care about the people in the group. So I think if you didn't, you would add fluff or dance around it a little bit more. So one of the topics you brought up, you said, hey, let's explore talking about the courage to lead.
Yeah.
And you've been through some stuff. You said, what did you say? COVID 1.0 and then or the original. So you've been through some really difficult healthcare scares in your time, and you were in a position, at least to be in a leadership role during those. What,
Yep.
you know, how did you find your courage, or where do you like? I don't even know where to go with that. Like, what made you make the decision to step up?
So part of it is intrinsic in my nature. I've always been very caring about those around me, and that's why I went into the health system to be a practitioner. Um, and so as a nurse, you are trained very early on to be an advocate for your patient. And so you learn very early on to step into your leadership because you need to, your patient depends on it. That said, as I grew in my career, what I found was what helped me really align with my courage was really getting clear with what my values are and giving myself permission to align my actions, my words, my thoughts with those values, which takes courage because you need to be courageous in order to be able to align your activities with your values. And the other part of this too is I've always had a bit of a risk tolerance, which helps me with my leadership. Because when you're a leader, you're challenging the process and you're proposing changes often that always imply risk. And so that's something that I've always been fairly comfortable with, was leaning forward into risk a little bit. Obviously, the balance with being an executive is knowing how to lean into that risk, but at the same time, balancing it with mitigation factors so that you can balance risks if they're exposed or if they actually translate into something. So I think for me, the courage is just learning to overcome adversity and just aligning yourself with your values. I know that when I was a kid and I went through some pretty gnarly situations as a kid being raised by narcissists, I learned very early on that courage meant standing up for myself. Courage meant having my voice and saying what was wrong or what I was feeling at the time. And maybe it wasn't always helpful with my narcissistic parents, but as I got older, that did serve me. So I think that's sort of courage is something you find inside, and it's about giving yourself permission to just act and to have an opinion and to move beyond that discomfort that comes with all of that. And that's the tough part.
No, I think that's really good. And I was going to ask you, I was going to backtrack and say, well, what do you, how do you define courage? Right? I know that's out of order, but you just hit it. It's like, okay, well, you have to be in that position. You got to give yourself permission to act. That, I think it's interesting too, right beforehand, and not to get way off track, but you said,
Mhm.
hey, because you said one of the videos that does well on your YouTube is about narcissists. So
Yeah.
that's something that's close to you. You said, well, I
Yeah.
had some narcissistic parents and so forth. How do you, let me ask you, how do you, if you have someone that's narcissistic in your work environment, in your direct employer that you are leading, what are some ways, since you're now the expert on that,
Well,
what are some ways that you could overcome that
mhm.
if you're leading someone in that role?
So leading someone versus reporting someone can be two different things when you're dealing with narcissists, because
Okay.
with narcissism, it's all about the power dynamic. They see themselves as higher than you and will do everything and anything possible to keep that dynamic at play. And so, for example, with my father, it was always about control of the family, what we did, where we went, how much money we spent, and it was always about what the neighbors thought about us. Versus,
Interesting.
versus like as a staffer, like I've had colleagues who were narcissists that I had to deal with and manage. And I'm going to say that in the workplace, it's a tough call. If you're reporting to someone, first of all, I just want to say, unless you're a therapist, and even if you are, don't go around diagnosing people as narcissists, okay? Because that's just
That's a
you're going to
good
get in
call.
trouble. Yeah, you're the one who's going to get pulled into HR. So just a heads up on that. You're not a therapist. Do not go to Google and say, "Yep, definitely a narcissist." Right? Just
Yeah.
don't do that. Um,
Disclaimer.
disclaimer, right? But if you feel like your manager or let's start with your manager. Let's say with your manager or your colleague, there's a power dynamic there. I think the first thing I would suggest is really document everything, every conversation, every decision, because they'll pretend they didn't hear something, they didn't make something happen, or they didn't decide on something. You're lying. I never said that. So with a narcissist, I found that I always had to document. And with narcissistic employees, it was about documenting their performance so that you can prove and demonstrate how they're not performing. It's really about boundaries, making sure you set boundaries for how you expect to be treated, understanding your rights in terms of, and I don't mean like big R rights, I mean rights in the department, in the organization you're working for. What are their policies on abuse and toxicity, and harassment and all those things, and really get clear about what you can do as an employee or as a manager to manage someone who has or is demonstrating these kinds of behaviors. So there's a lot of experts out there. I'm just one person who experienced this and shares my thoughts around how I managed to get out of my narcissistic environment, how I managed my ex, and also how I manage staff. And it's just something that sort of, for some reason, has been a thread throughout my entire career. But I have found boundaries, clarity, not buying into their games, being very careful about what you share with them, maintaining, a sandbox of how you'll work with them. And if things get really intolerant, I've basically said to colleagues of mine, like, look for a position elsewhere, look for opportunities elsewhere. If you really are not feeling safe in your career, or you feel like you're being dismantled in some way, because my colleague was trying to take me down. Like, he was legitimately trying to destroy my career because he didn't like that I had exposed him to something he had done that was borderline
not good,
questionable. Okay. And from a financial perspective. And so that's what those are sort of like top end, sort of some of the tips I would suggest. They're very much an overview. There's more detail in that, but I would suggest those are like, that's where I would start if I had somebody like that in my.
No, and I think that's a really good answer. I mean, the other thing I think you said at the very beginning, like, don't just go out, for anybody that's watching this podcast or listening to the audio later, you can't just go out and start, diagnosing with people with narcissism. And so I don't want to catch us in a trap, but it is one, when somebody thinks that they're like that Teflon manager or that Teflon follower, that nothing affects them, and they have a higher viewpoint of themselves and so forth. I think, there is a fine line, and you would probably agree with this, Tammy. There's a fine line between somebody being like really toxic and narcissistic versus just having a little bit of an ego, or even missing the opportunity to have connected with people. Yeah. Right. Sometimes I don't know. I mean, and this is just my opinion. You could correct me if you have a different one. But I think a lot of people post COVID, in the last 2 or 3 years, people have shrunk down to come back to kind of protect themselves, if that makes sense. So they've moved into this role of, okay, well, I got to cover myself first. And so I think sometimes it may not be those toxic behaviors, is you just got to crack that shell that they formed around themselves to be able to connect with them and so forth.
Yeah, but I agree with you in principle, but I would say that COVID is situational. Like, there's different layers, right? There's the individual who has consistently demonstrated poor behavior.
Sure.
And they've done so for the last 10 years or the last 5 years. COVID was not even a factor. They've always been hope, right? And then there's those that have had COVID that have had this sort of stress response because of the whole process. And I do agree with you. I think we have gone we've lacked a bit of, it's like we've lost some of our social skills a little bit. And what social decorum really means. Like, we've gone, as is a little bit of a diversion, but I think it speaks to the communication issues we're dealing with in the office as people go back now, is there seems to be a loss of capacity to disagree with people without, like, it's us versus them. I can't stand you because you're not on the same political spectrum as me. It's like, well, hold on a second now. As a human being, we all want the same things. We want to raise our kids. We want to be loved. We want to have fun. We want to be safe. We all want the same bloody things. Right. We just might want them in a slightly different way. And I feel like we've lost the ability to have that conversation. And we're seeing it in office spaces now as people go back to the office, where there's that lack of decorum. And I have a challenge with that right now.
I absolutely agree with you. Not, where else you see it is on the road. People driving places, they've lost the ability. But I absolutely agree with you. Hey, Mike Ashe, and then Ben says, everyone you work with is on a bell curve. I got to put it up here. And you are not going to move those at the difficult end into the fine part. I think that's Agreed. A really good point, is because, and we talk about this in our work in sales, right? If you've got that bell curve here, that's my bell curve on the,
very fancy.
You're going to have people on this side
Yeah.
That no matter what, they're agreeable, they're easy, everything else, that's 10% of the people.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you're going to have that 10% of people that no matter what you do, right? And I think that's something that's really valuable just to pay attention to if you're in a leadership role. So if you got 10% on either side or 20%, take your pick, right? You have 60 to 80% of the people that are in the middle that you can influence, that you can move, that you can impact, that you can grow, that you can connect with, and you probably can the 10 or 20% that are on the easy side too.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to fall into the trap. I've said this in business before too, like when I was actively, working in a call center. It's interesting. And this is just how my brain works, Tammy. So just roll with me on this.
Okay.
But like what would happen is okay. So, hey, if you got to make 100 phone calls a day and you get one person that's a jerk,
Right.
don't allow that to dictate the next 99 and how you deal with them.
Yeah.
And that goes for anything in life, like most of the people at work. But I think it feels amplified. That's like one of the things that you're saying. It feels amplified because people have lost that ability to have effective and collaborative disagreements.
Yeah. And I think the hard part is that while it's true what Ben is suggesting around the bell curve, my only argument is that bell curve gets real for you when your manager's at the bottom of that bell curve and you're trying to manage your life day to day through that person. And I think that if you look at the executive cadre, I don't have the exact percentage.
Okay.
So don't quote me on this, but it's something to the effect of something like 1 out of 5 executives have psychotic tendencies. Like when I mean psychotic tendencies, like are not empathetic, who are just anything at all costs, right? Because they're all about performance, right? When you get to that level, and I've experienced this, when you get to that level, it's all about your performance and meeting your objectives. And at some point, it's no longer about the people, it's about the performance. And I think that that's something that execs that I'm working with are challenged by because it goes against their values. It goes against who they are, and they're struggling. And that's part of the reason why I left my executive role, was because, no, I'm not suggesting the government of Canada is that way. I'm just suggesting that it was, for me, the idea of performance over people just didn't sit well with me. And I know that that's not explicitly stated, but it was the implicit message. And I think when you have that implicit, explicit values that don't match, that's when you have issues with trust, and you have issues with performance, and you have issues with culture. There was a mismatch of values between what was explicitly stated and what was implicitly implied. And so I think that's kind of a big piece of it for me. And I think if you look at different people, like where they work in the chain of command, the bell curve will look different on toxicity levels, in my opinion.
100%. One of my favorite people to quote, I'm a big fan of John Maxwell. And one of the things he points out is like leadership levels, like what you're talking about. Hey, the bell curve looks different depending on where you're at on it.
Yeah.
When he talks about the 5 levels of leadership, and he refers to like, you're on a different level with everybody, and if you're on a level 3 with some people, there's other people that are on 2s and 1s, and you're striving for 4, like from your outside looking in saying, well, I want to get to a level 4 or a level 5, or you think you're a level 4 or level 5, but do you sit that way with everyone? So I think that's really valuable that you point that out. Is it does look different depending on where you sit.
And I just want to say that I know you're gonna highlight, but I just want to say in addition to that is that when you learn to translate between the levels is when you'll succeed as a leader. So one of the things I really kind of connected with when I was a manager, senior manager, I connected with my blue collar guys a lot more than I did with my exec cadre. What happened was there was a disconnect in how I was collaborating and managing up. And so I wasn't successful in the sense that they were not looking at me as executive material. But the minute I figured out how to translate what my group needed and wanted in the language that the executives understood and spoke, that's when I became executive material. So it's all about learning how to communicate to the various levels. And that's up and down, by the way, so that you can be successful. You need to translate. Like I had to translate strategic vision to the guys in the warehouse. And I think that was like primordial to me being successful as a leader in that environment.
what's crazy, and while we're on this subject, I did just pre-COVID. It was
Right.
interesting. I had a the Colorado Association of Fairs and Shows, the people that like organize our local rodeo, asked me to come in and do a talk on how leadership can more effectively bridge the gap to communicate with their frontline guys and gals. And so it's interesting that you say that, because at the time, I was shocked, of all things. Like I'm
Yeah.
thinking, well, I'm a leadership and management guy. Let's go to the rodeo, right? Right. Let's go talk about this,
Yeah.
right? Then I can really now say it's not my first rodeo.
Right. I was just going to say that. That's awesome.
But so I went, and it was so it was so interesting, because you're absolutely right. You have to be able to communicate. You have people that are operating at all these different levels. And I don't know if until that point, like, it just did it. So like, it didn't occur to me. And so I think that's what you're saying too, is like, hey, I had these blue collar guys and the C-suite guys, and it like, until you learn that you have to communicate differently to get that same message across sometimes to people, like it just never crossed my mind. And they literally reached out to me and specifically said, hey, how can we do this?
Yeah.
So I'll bring this up. Ben says, hey, completely agree. And you have to do exactly what you said. Document everything, focus on you, and hold the high ground. Start looking elsewhere. Time to move on. Yeah. And I think that's a really hard, I know we're backtracking a little bit from in the conversation, like when we were talking about how do you deal with a toxic boss, a toxic coworker, a narcissist, and so forth. Ben's tying it up on that it's like, that's something that's really hard. It's hard sometimes to say, well, you have to look somewhere else. It is time to move on. And I think people in general have a tough time with that, especially if you're invested in where you're at, you know?
Yeah. And as a coach, I tend to work with I have clients who do this all the time, who want to shift their, they're not happy. And one of the things I always do is put them through a bit of a framework of, what's the worst that can happen if you move? What's the best that could happen? What if this works out really well for you? And ultimately it ties down to, what is it that you really want in your career? And is where you are now actually going to get you there? And if working for a toxic leader is going to burn you out or make you miserable or make you sick or not get you the career promotion you're looking for, then what's the effing point? So it's sort of, working with people, again, it comes down to, what are your values? What do you want? What is your why? There's plenty of Simon Sinek and other books out there that talk about what's your why, right?
Sure.
And whether you are a fan of these guys or not, the reality is you really do need to get to the baseline of what it is you want. If you're a leader and you want to grow, well, what is it you're looking to achieve in your career, in your life as a leader? Like, what are you looking to achieve? And then it's only when you know that you can start planning out your action steps. And so I think for me, that's one of the things I help people with, is trying to get them to shift their careers if they're just not happy where they are. Sure. And there's a lot of resistance, because you're right. Humans don't want to change. We don't like change. We like it where we are, like screw change. Right. But
I'm in this comfort zone. I'm in the rhythm right now. Right. I'm in the mojo, and you got to look at them and go, no, you're not. Right. So let me ask you a question. Because that is what you do, right? You coach and consult people in this arena specifically. If I were to say, okay, and it's probably much longer than this, so you could expand or not. But if I were to say, okay, well, Tammy, what are like 3 things, if somebody's trying to get clear as to what their next steps are, or what's in the framework, without giving away all the secret sauce, what are 3 or maybe 4 things that you would tell them? Hey, do this, 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 and this. Here's the next step. You got to sit down and do these things. What actions would you advise them to take?
Well, I've kind of already alluded to this. And I just want to clarify that when you're coaching people, it's the answers. I'm of the belief system that our answers are always within us. They're always inside us. We don't need someone else to tell us what to do. We just need someone to give us permission to go in and the answers. And that's what I do. I give people permission to do that. And so I think the idea here is to really get quiet with yourself and to do a bit of a life perspective, because we're whole people, is what is it you're looking to achieve? Because ultimately, nothing you do will work if you don't know where you're going. I've said this in videos before, where, your life is like, it's like going on a trip. It's, if you don't have, we used to use paper maps back in the old days. I'm not old. Or you can use Google. The reality is, if you don't know where you're going, you can't get there. So you need to figure out, get your shit together and figure out, what is it you really want? Is it six? And I'm talking values. Is it success? It's not money. Money is never an outcome, by the way. It's never an outcome. Money is what comes when you meet your objective. It's what comes when you align with your values. That's just the way it is. To me, when I have somebody say to me, well, I just want to make more money. What's at the root of that? Why do you want to make more money? And then getting clear on that. So what I often will do is tell people I have a client that I sent off and I said, okay, I want you to go home and I want you to take a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to write 5 things that bring you joy. 5 things. It could be anything. Good. 5 things that bring you joy. And then we'll come back and talk about it. And it was things like, for her, it was, I love coffee. I love making coffee, drinking coffee. It's just one of her things. Right. And then when we started talking,
I like her.
Right. So do I. And then, she liked playing guitar, which Ben will get, it's those kinds of things. And then I said, okay, but what about your career? What brings you joy in your job? Like the kinds of things you really love. And she talked about, I really love connecting with people. I really love. So you take those joy pieces and you try to figure out, how can you weave this into your future life and career? For her, believe it or not, it ended up being like, her dream is to open up a coffee shop in the Caribbean. Hello, I'm there. I'm like, yeah, you do that. Jeez. And I'll come and see you. I'll be your first client.
Right.
Right. But then she was like, okay, but then how do I get there from my corporate job to put that in 10 years? I'm like, well, let's hammer it out. Like, what would it take for you to do that? And then of course, all the fears come up, all the inner critics. What are you, stupid? You can't, that's a stupid dream. That's pie in the sky. And all that stuff starts to come up. Then I kind of try to read them. It's like, yeah, just forget the inner critic for just 2 seconds and think about it. What is it you really want? And then you can start carving out the art of the possible of what the next logical step is. Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul guy, always talks about this. What's the next logical step? And then you just go in that direction. When you do Google Maps, you know where the end direction is. You want to be this person or this career, or you want to be at this level. But, the route all in the way, there might be construction along this route. Now you got to do a detour and go around here. That's just the way life is. So you can't plan out your entire life, but you need to at least have a sense of where you're going. And then you can backtrack through your action planning and course correct and pivot along the way as you need to. That's like high level without going into like IP questions and questionnaires, but that's sort of what I do to kind of get people to start thinking about where they want to go in life. And it's a simple exercise, but people rarely take the time to actually just think about what it is they really want. And if you can't figure out what you really want, what do you freaking hate? What is driving you bonkers right now? What can you not stand? Like, are you the person like, I hate it when I go to the store and there's incompetence or whatever? Just identify what you hate, because that will lead to what you love or what you like, because you want the opposite of that, right? So
yes.
Anyway.
No, that is an absolutely fantastic perspective, because, and it's so easy for people to fall into the negative. It's easy to fall into and focus on the negative. Like, we all know what we don't like and what we complain about. Like, that's easy. Yeah. That's easy stuff. It's easy to, and I think it's important as a tool. I think it's also important. We know people don't live there. But just to recap, because I said, like, hey, how does somebody get clear? Where do we start? And I always take notes because it helps me too. I think it's great. But you said, give yourself permission, get clear. Where are you going? What do you want? I think it's really valuable that you said people got to realize money's not the outcome. We have the illusion that money's the outcome. Money is the immediate. It's the tool.
It's the tool that gets you what you want, but it's not. It should not be your goal.
And then you said, how does it fit in your future? And I think that's absolutely like that. That's just fantastic. And then I know I'm repeating it. I'm repeating it for the audience's sake of, like, when you're saying, hey, focus on what you don't want, or don't focus on what you don't want. Yeah, don't do that. But figure out what you don't want. And then.
So I'll even spin this for people that are in the workplace.
Sure.
So say you're in a team meeting. Everybody likes to bitch, whine, and complain, right? We go to a team meeting, everybody's complaining about what's not working and the person that's getting on their nerves and the system that isn't working and blah, blah, blah. What I want you to do then is, if you put in a coaching hat as a leader and you say, okay, I'm hearing a lot of complaints, but what is it that we do want? And that's where the gold is. Because one of the things I always found was, I remember when I assumed a team, there was a very squeaky wheel on the team. And everybody used to say, he's really difficult to work with. He's complaining all the time. And I thought, there's gold in there. There's a reason why he's complaining. So the minute I gave him some airtime, and I'm not saying I gave him time to just bitch, whine, and complain. I was like, okay, I hear your complaints. What do you want?
Yeah,
what do you want? I hear what you don't want. What do you want? And when you do that with your team, then it shifts the narrative from the negative to the positive in the meeting. So now you're constructing, you're building. You're not concentrating on the negative and getting into this like low vibration. You're moving forward. So to me, that you can always shift the narrative in the conversation during a call or during a meeting by doing that.
No, and I think that's really valuable because I in the past, even in my younger management career, one of the things I always said, look, you're not allowed to come with a problem if you don't come with a solution. And it was interesting because I would have people come and say, why? Yeah, but I can identify the problem. If I knew the solution, it wouldn't be, it's like, okay, well, at least try and come up with something. If you can,
or let's brainstorm about what's the art of the possible here. Yeah.
Let's talk about it. One of the other pieces that you brought up, and I think this is covered sort of in our whole talk here, especially like when you were saying, hey, connecting with the blue collar guys in the C-suite and how to communicate differently.
Yeah.
So one of the direct comments you sent me was, hey, we should touch on how leadership is not positional, but relational.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that for me, just on that single statement? Leadership is not positional, but relational.
So when I work with new leaders, what I often find is they're like, okay, I've got the title, so I'm the boss, right? What I say goes. I was like, yeah, but you're not a leader. You're the boss, just so we're clear. And
What's
I think
the difference?
That's the difference is that the boss is directional. They're the ones that will keep you on task. They're the ones that will performance manage you. But a leader is the one that can bring you willingly and not force you to do something, right? A boss is just going to like do it or you get fired. Right? It's like there's like a threat behind it almost, right? Whereas I find with leadership, you don't necessarily need to boss people if you lead them appropriately. So it's about communication. It's about getting to know your team. It's about being an active listener and hearing out what their issues are. A lot of times when people don't perform, it's because they're not feeling heard or they're not feeling like they're a part of the team, or maybe that's just not a good fit for them. And so as a leader, your job is to have that conversation with them, open conversation, but it's also about vision. You need to be able to pull your team along. If they don't understand not only why your team is doing something, but how they personally fit into the equation, you're not going to get buy-in. It's that simple. And so for me, leadership is all about, really, it comes down to the leader gives a shit about the people. The boss only cares about themselves and how they show up to their leaders. And I feel like there's a time and a place for both. But I feel like if you really lead people properly, you rarely have to, quote, boss them around. I find that they'll just come along. And in fact, when I did this with my Nest guys, there were a number of union issues on the table. When I first assumed that team, we had a number of complaints that I had to work through with the unions. One of which was violence in the workplace. And so we had to figure all this stuff out. And it was only through constant and regular conversation. And yeah, it was exhausting at times to have I show up at the warehouse and I'd have like a lineup of guys who want to talk to me about problems. But the reality is that in doing that, what I found is that over time, not only did the trust grow, and by the time I was done working there, I knew I could depend on these guys to do anything for me. And I didn't have to say anything. All I'd have to say is, hey, we've got, perfect example. Now we've got fires in Kelowna, Canada. This would have been a time when we would be really busy deploying assets, right? Because it's a stockpile. So I would have been like, okay, guys, we're going to lean forward. And they wouldn't have hesitated to do it. Now, they wouldn't have hesitated before because they're professional and this is what these guys do. But I found that they went the extra mile. They would suggest things and they would come up with ideas because they felt safe and capable of sharing their ideas on how to do things differently without being reprimanded first. Because before it was always no first and then just do your job. Or
Mhm.
worse than that, the guy before me would micromanage how they would manage their warehouse. And I remember them coming to me saying to me one day, Tammy, we want to move pallets from here to here. Are you okay with that? I'm like, I don't give a shit where you move the pallets. Is it safe? Yeah. Is it according to protocol? Yeah. Well, then fucking do it. I don't care.
Move
Like, just
'em.
go do it. Go move the
So,
pallets.
so
You're
before
the
we get
experts.
before we get too far off, I want to ask you a question because
Sure.
you just hit a couple things that I keyed in on. You said, okay, well, the guy that was there before me. And I'm just curious, what is the experience? Because you were dealing with, it sounds like mostly men in the workplace, and you were talking
All
about like
men. I
balance.
was the first woman to lead that organization in 50 years.
So I'm curious, like as you're coming in
Mhm.
from a woman's perspective,
Yeah.
how difficult was that?
The first day I showed up in the office, funny
Mhm.
story. I was talking to my supervisor of the warehouse, and another co-supervisor shows up and he says, "Hey, Tammy, it's a good thing you're here because there's dishes in the sink." I thought, "Oh, is that where we're going with this? Okay, I got you." So I didn't get pissed off. I didn't report the guy to union or HR. I just looked at him and said, "Hmm. So who signs off on your overtime again?" "Well, you do." "Yeah." "And who approves your leave?" "You do." "And who can make your life really effing difficult in this warehouse space?" "You do." "Yeah. I suggest you turn your sexist ass around and go do your own dishes." Right?
Yeah.
And just kind of called it out. And the guys are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. Like, you got called out."
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I never heard that shit again after that. So the thing is that for me, it wasn't about being crass or rude or
Sure.
angry. I didn't come at it from a point of, I'm so offended. No, no, no. It
Just
was
hold the
just
line.
learning to hold your line and your boundaries of, this is my position. I'm in a position of power here. You can't talk to me that way. And I remember having to say to the guys on a number of occasions in meetings, look, guys, little respect and decorum on how we talk to each other. That's what I expect. That's how I'm going to treat you. So I want that back. I remember them complaining and complaining and complaining and complaining and saying, guys, I have 3 children at home. Like, enough. Like, come to the table with some understanding
Sure.
and some, yeah, like I don't need 25 other children to treat and behave and misbehave. So it's really just about learning to like communicate at the level that they understand, but at the same time you're bringing them up a level so they understand that, professionalism means this, and my boundaries are here. And it's like, the person before was abusive. He never even knew their names. He called them side names. Like, "Hey, forklift guy." Like, Jesus, Murphy, man. Like, you don't do that. Like, at least get to know
Sure.
who who
Forklift guy
is. Like, I remember when one of the guys came up to me, he's like, "My name is so-and-so. I just booked the trucks." I'm like, "Oh, so you're the book trucking guy. I got it." Like, it's just like, yeah. So again, it comes down to that relationship piece of understanding that you might be in a position of power. I've had very high level executives come into a room and have zero respect of their organization because they're bullies and don't listen to anyone in the room.
Sure.
So your position's squat, in my opinion.
Well, I think, and again, I'm kind of repeating what I'm hearing you say is, one, the fact that you did listen, the
You have
fact
to.
that you communicated. I mean, the one of the biggest, most, I think, authentic things that a leader can do. And what you just said was, well, I communicated with the guys, right? It was not just a monologue. It was not
No.
just you speaking at them, which it sounded like the previous person was. It was, hey, here's what we're going to do. And you said early on in the conversation when they
Yep.
were coming to you with stuff that they felt safe and they felt heard.
Yep.
And that's to me, that's a little bit of a unique women's perspective, because as men in leadership, we don't like we don't see that. It's not something that's right in front of us. Like i've I have never had somebody come and say, well, they felt safe and heard. Now, not to say that they don't, but I think that's something that is, anybody should take away from this, because it doesn't matter if it's men or women, people in the workplace. If you're leading people, people need to feel safe and heard.
Yeah. And to be clear, they never said those words to me. I just knew that that was the implication, right?
Right. Right. No, I believe me, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I like, for me, I've never, even myself, like I said, I learn as much from talking and interviewing people as I
Mhm.
hope to share with my audience. Like, that's never occurred to me until like it hasn't been put into words as a male until just now. And that's something that is like, it's really cool. The fact that you can say, hey, I knew this, and these guys would toe the line for you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. They were very upset when I was removed by a misogynistic leader who didn't like my style. I was removed. I was removed, and they didn't like it. And let me tell you, the culture went downhill for a period of time afterwards. But that's just the nature of the worlds that we live in, and we are societally. I mean, at least in North America, I can't speak for other nations and other countries. I just know in Canada and the US, because we're very much cousins and very similar in how we raise our kids, is that historically speaking, I think we can safely say we're both Gen Xers here. The reality is that the two of us were raised in a community where boys were boys and girls were girls, and the girls were quiet and well-behaved and accommodating, and the boys were leaders and did their thing and were rough and tumble, and that was just boys were boys, right? And I think that that's generalization, and I fully understand that that's a generalization. That wasn't for everybody, but the reality is that we're now seeing a nice shift. And I say it's a nice shift. It's actually a really welcome shift, where we're starting to understand that the training that we got as a society was not helpful to us having a very productive, happy, satisfied, cohesive culture as an organization, or as a group of people in North America. I feel like we're starting to see that blend of understanding that we bring really great qualities to the workplace. And yeah, women are very intuitive, because biologically speaking, we have babies, and hormonally speaking, there are triggers that make us more aware. I mean, there's plenty of studies out there that show about how, women are actually make better Formula One drivers than men, but you'll never see them as drivers because there's a machismo sort of thing with racing right now. And I feel like because our reaction time is a little bit quicker than men's, generally speaking. So there's reasons, like biologically speaking, we're different, but I feel like societally, if we really take advantage of those things that we have that are maybe slight differences and blend them, we can be really complementary. And I think that was the key to me working with these guys, was realizing that it's not a me versus them situation. It's about me understanding how to translate messages to and fro, and then being willing to hear their perspective. As blue collar and as cursey worded as it was, the reality is that they had a lot of value to add, and so did I. And to be quite honest with you, when I started to allow them to speak and they felt more safe, they did become a bit softer in a good way. They weren't as tough-minded and as machismo. There was a lot more kinder words used. I found their approach was a little softer. It wasn't quite as hard-edged. So I feel like we definitely can have a big influence in that area and undo some of that cultural programming that we've undergone.
I think some of it is perspective, because I do think there's time and place. And like, I appreciate what you're saying. You're saying, hey, boys are boys, girls are girls, and so forth.
That's what we were trained. I'm not saying that's what I'm saying.
Well, I will say it. I'm not afraid. Like, I think there is like, we both bring value. We both add pieces, men and women, boys and girls, and so forth. And they are supposed to be complementary. Yeah. And I do think from the workplaces I've been in, I have heavily employed women for a number of years. And I think the one thing that I can speak to, like what you were saying, one of the pieces, and this is in mass, right? This is just a mass statement. Like, I do think women listen differently than men. They do. And they take it in, they process things differently. And so that's why, like, even when you were saying before of, hey, these guys felt safe and they felt heard, I think that's a unique perspective from you in a leadership role, because it's not something where you have guys. It is more of a rough and tumble environment, and you see more of this versus for lack of a better word, I don't want to say safe space, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that the anger dial was down, because what the difference is here is when you lead with empathy, which is what this is. When you lead with empathy, what you're doing is you're giving your people permission to emote other emotions besides anger. Because let's be honest, culturally speaking, anger is the only emotion men are tolerated to have in our society. The minute you I mean, generally speaking, I know my folks that I grew up with, it was very much anger, aggression, there wasn't a lot, like if you cried, you were crying like a girl. And if you got hurt, you were running like a girl. Like that was the sexist stuff that we used to hear growing up. And I know that that's not where we are now, but I have the folks that are in power now, the positions of power are us Gen Xers, and we still bring some of that programming in with us. And I can tell you as a female that I have fought misogyny my entire career, where I have experienced sexism directly, where I was spoken over or where I was asked to be removed from a project because I was pregnant. Like this is like 15 years ago. They were not talking 1950 here, right? And so there's still a lot of work to be done on the gender equation in leadership. And I could talk a whole other hour on just that topic alone.
Sure.
But I do feel that it really, really comes down to, regardless of what your space is and what your opinion is on this matter, the reality is if you come at leadership with empathy, and with the other person in mind, rather than just your own agenda, man, you can go so far with building your team. And you can build a team like, I'm going to be extreme here by saying this to your American audience. You could have a group of Trump versus Biden people in the room, but you can connect that team together in a workspace if you show empathetic leadership in a way that is non-political. You can totally do it. It is possible. No, but I'm just saying it is possible. It's not, right? So.
Absolutely. Well, no, I mean, I think that is one key. If for, people watching or listening, if you're, taking notes, that's one thing for sure. Write it down. Like have an attitude of service. Lead with empathy first. I think that is one of the most valuable things. Ben says what she said 100%. Oh gosh. But I think there's so much value in that. We as it's human nature to jump in and lead from what our perspective is. Well, here's where I'm going, or here's where I'm. And I heard it said one time, gosh, I wish I could remember where to quote it from, Tammy, but rather than coming in with the I in the sentence, you've got to shift it to we or you.
Yeah.
And I think even the shift in the terminology, right? Shifting the semantics of the situation puts you in a position of service and to be able to connect with people, like you were saying, like connecting with people on an entirely different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's super important, because that's really the only way you can connect teams. Because remember, we all have our different perspectives. We all come in with bias. Every single one of us has a bias, and we're always looking to confirm it. That's just the nature of our brains and who we are as people, as humans. So, as a leader, one of the things you can do, one of my more final takeaways as we start to look at closing out, is the notion that if you really want to be a great leader, it really comes down to understanding who you are and how you show up in the world and how you react and what your triggers are and how you respond to things. And the sooner you get clear, and I mean, not cursory clearness, like from a narcissistic perspective, I'm so great, I did all these things, I got promoted, I got this title. No. When you get pissed off, like how do you react? How do you really react? When things don't go your way, how do you respond? Because the sooner you understand, and what are you biased against? Like we all have them. I don't care who you are as a human being on this planet. Every single one of us has a bias, whether we like it or not.
More than one.
Yeah. And so what's that bias look like? And be aware of it and challenge it when it shows up for you. And I think as long as you keep doing that, you'll keep growing as a leader, and you'll be more and more likable as a leader, and people will really gravitate towards you because they'll see that you're an open, dynamic, welcoming leader that's going to support them and not be so self-agendaed. So, yeah.
I think that's really good. I want to backtrack again for just a second. I know we're kind of coming down the pipe here.
No, I'm not pressing. It's your podcast. I'm just saying.
No, here's the thing. So you mentioned a minute ago, you said if we took the Trump supporters, we took the Biden supporters, and we put them together, right? So maybe not that extreme, but how do you, from a leadership perspective, what are a couple things that you can do to help bridge that gap, and how do you handle it when you have some people at work that don't get along?
So I think it's honoring the notion that every single one of us comes at a problem with a different perspective, first off, and just honoring that, saying, look, I get that we all are thinking different things here. I get that we have different perspectives for a variety of different good or bad reasons, right? But again, it comes down to vision. What are we trying to achieve as a group? And then the how might have to be teased out, negotiated, figured out, communicated, what have you. But the reality is that, just trying to get everybody on board with the same vision. If you can do that, it's not always easy, but the reality is the big picture, you can usually get everybody on board if they understand why we're doing something.
Sure.
And so even if they come from different spectrums, one of the things that I found with the people that I've worked with was looking at what both groups are looking to achieve, or what they might be slightly different. What are they looking to achieve? And then what are the overlaps? It's like a Venn diagram. Like you have like one group is thinking this way and the other group is thinking somewhere in the middle. There is the secret sauce where you can agree upon it. And it might not be exactly the vision you had in mind, but it's close enough that you can get everybody on board with that vision to move forward. So I think it's really about looking at where we're similar versus where we're different, and figuring out how do we then use that to get to the vision that we're being strategically told we need to get to from our management. And
that's really good.
It really comes down to that.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. So any couple things, as we're at almost an hour here. It's crazy to me once I get to talking to folks how quickly the time goes.
Goes fast.
So for anybody here, if you are not connected with Tammy, I would highly encourage you go to her Linktree. It's linktree.com/ or Linktree forward. I never can get that / on the level leadership. And if you want to get on the level with Tammy, I would encourage you to go and check that out. Any final thoughts, Tammy, to take us out? Any nuggets to drop, or should they just go connect with you?
No, I would say, well, there's no big nuggets. I would just say, just keep on keeping on out there. Like, wherever, start with where you are. I think that would be my final thing is, if you're a leader, I don't care if you're in a lower level position in an organization or you're the CEO. The reality is you start from where you are and do an exercise, find a coach, get a mentor, somebody who can help you kind of go inward and really figure out who you are, how you show up, and where your gaps are in your leadership journey, so you can start to work towards filling those gaps. And that's really the only thing I would say.
No, I think that's absolutely great. I put it in the notes. Start from where you are.
Yeah.
100%. So Tammy, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for all of the energy and the insights and just the information that you've shared with everybody. Like I said, and Mike said it early on in the chat as well, like you bring a really valuable and unique perspective, not just to our group, but to my audience here this afternoon. So I appreciate you very much. I thank you for that.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take us out. So for everybody that tuned in today, do me a favor, make sure you throw some thumbs up on the video. Make sure, if you're not already subscribe to the channel here so that you get notified when I'm going live, when I'm bringing new guests on. I've got a new show every week at 12:05 Mountain, 2:05 Eastern. And lastly, certainly, if you are not connected with Tammy, make sure you do that. It's Linktree / on the level leadership. She's absolutely awesome. And if you want to get to a new level, you can tell here today, she has so much value to offer. I would highly encourage you to connect with her. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, be great.